This is All of It on WNYC. I'm Allison Stewart. In a new novel, two women set out to bring a mob boss to his knees. The book is set in 1930s New York, and at its center are Polly Adler, a successful brothel owner who caters to the rich and powerful, and Eunice Carter, the first black assistant district attorney for the state of New York. Polly and Eunice team up to take down a leader of one of New York's organized crime families. The book is called A Pair of Aces. It was co-written by authors Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray. Marie explained how they came up with the idea for the book.
Well, Victoria likes to describe me as our treasure hunter. There's nothing I love more than to be down in the rabbit hole of research. And we had talked about looking for an unlikely duo. Two people on sort of opposite sides of the world coming together to effectuate great change. And so I consulted this really long list of incredible historical women that I keep at the ready, women I've found over time writing a bunch of the other books that I've written. And Eunice Carter had been on that list. I was a litigator in New York City for over a decade, and I had come across her. And then as I kind of switched from being a lawyer to being a writer, I wasn't like excited to revisit all the stuff that went with being a lawyer. So she kind of got, I wouldn't want to say lost in the shuffle, but kind of I wasn't revisiting her. But as we were thinking about this theme, I took another look at Eunice and I knew she was amazing. As a woman myself many decades ago who had been a lawyer, there weren't a lot of other
Yeah.
female lawyers. And to be a Black female lawyer, that was just unfathomable and amazing. And so the more I dug, the more I looked, the more it became clear that, she had done really incredible things. But as Victoria likes to say, she didn't do it alone. That's when Polly Adler came into the mix, really trying to find someone who would be the other half of that unlikely duo, someone who could be a stand-in for all the women on the other side of the law who helps Polly. And who better than the most famous madam of her age?
This is the 1930s Victoria. Eunice needs Polly to help build a case against Lucky Luciano. Polly doesn't trust Eunice at first. Eunice is a bit judgmental of Polly. What does each woman admire or perhaps misunderstand about the other?
I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in the beginning. I think Eunice is a bit judgmental, not in a negative way, but she's against organized prostitution, and Polly is part of organized prostitution. And then Polly doesn't understand Eunice. She's this unicorn that she's never seen before, a Black woman in law enforcement. She doesn't understand it. So in the beginning, they don't understand each other, but they come together understanding that they have a common goal and that they don't have to be friends to work together here. They can do this together.
It's interesting. The book takes on real life people, Marie, Eunice, Polly, Thomas Dewey, Lucky Luciano. So you have the facts of who these people are, but you also have to kind of create their characters. Where did you go to find details about their lives? Or did you use your imagination?
I would say, it's a little different for each woman. Obviously, original source material is our favorite, if you can find it. And, court transcripts and court records were available for the case that eventually these two women helped create in our story. But I would say to actually capture kind of the voice and some of the finer details of the women, for Polly Adler, she wrote an autobiography. And when you find an autobiography when you're writing these kind of books, you are so excited because it's the woman's story in her own voice. You have to approach it with a grain of salt because they're, casting their own spin on their life events. But you could hear Polly's voice and you could get sort of nuances and details that wouldn't have been available otherwise. For Eunice, and maybe Victoria can talk to this more, we were so fortunate that Eunice's grandson, who's a very well-known author himself, Stephen Carter, and a Yale law professor, wrote an incredible biography of her, which also contained family details, right? Things that in their own way were kind of source material, different from a traditional biography. I don't know anything you want to add to that,
Yeah,
Victoria?
Victoria, tell us about Eunice Carter.
Yeah, so the thing that was so interesting about Eunice Carter was, as Marie said, her grandson's biography. And it was an interesting biography because usually biographies are just the facts about the person, but this is someone who knew the person intimately.
Yeah.
He knew his grandmother. So it was a combination of a biography that you're normally used to, but he always slid his voice and his experiences in there as well. And while reading that, I got a really good picture of who she was, where she came from with her parents, where she was in the present time, and even what happened in her life after, and how he viewed her as a very staunch, very correct woman. And I built her voice. Marie and I built her voice from that.
Okay, I have to ask. You said Marie and I built her voice. Marie said Victoria and I built this. How did you do it? How did you write the novel? Did each of you take the character? Did you pass it off to each other? Marie, I'll have you start. How do you write a novel together?
Yeah, I mean, kind of all the things that you said, right? I'm the treasure hunter, but once we kind of settle on the two women, in conjunction with our publisher, we work together on the outline. Then we do some deeper research into each of the characters and the time period. A lot of the fiction really comes in the areas where you don't know the answers to something. You might know that the two people, a certain court event happened on a particular day, but you might not know exactly what transpired, and that's kind of the fiction filling in. But once we kind of do all that, lay out the chapters, then we each take one of the characters to start. I took Polly, Victoria took Eunice, and kind of followed along the trail that we had set together for the story, and then kind of wove them together after that. But taking the chapters back and forth, editing them together, writing them together.
What's challenging about that? You each have your own group or its own territory, but then you have to put them all together so it makes sense.
Yes, but it's interesting because I wouldn't say we have our own territory. Each one
Yeah.
of us writes the first draft because,
Gotcha.
or else we would be sitting there together writing word for word, though I know people who do that. Each one of us writes the first draft, and then from there, Allison, we just continue working together on every page. So Marie will say something to me like, I don't like the way Eleanor is speaking to Mary McLeod Bethune here, or something like that. And then I'll push. It's so much fun because a collaboration, I don't think any two people can write together. I think you really have to. I often say that Marie is my writing soulmate because we have the same goals. We have the same aspirations for our characters. It's not about us. So we write together. We write together to give the best story for the women that we've unfolded.
Yeah, and one of the things I'd add to that is, we write fiction, right? So they are certainly inspired by these historical women and the events that they were involved in, but they are characters that we have created inspired by them. So that gives us some latitude when we're kind of working back and forth and discussing the arcs of their stories and the events that they're involved in.
Set in 1930s New York, a historical fiction novel follows two women on opposite sides of the law, a prosecutor and a madame, who form an unlikely partnership to take down a notorious mob boss. Authors Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray join us to talk about their new book, A Pair of Aces. Victoria, Eunice's husband.
Yes.
Oh, I had a hard time with him. He tries to get her to step down from her role to take care of their home, which she wants to take care of their son, which she wants to. What does she see as her role as an assistant district attorney? And what does she see as her role as a Black woman in this role?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Not much has changed, right? But I think I'm so glad you asked the question that way. What does she see as her role as a Black woman? Because I think she saw herself as someone who was going to be a first. And what she did, she was going to be paving the way for women behind her. And she had learned a lot of that from her mother, who was a first in many ways as well. And so she was very aware that her role as a Black woman who was educated in the 1930s, We're only talking 60 years after emancipation. She understood that she was paving the way and that it was going to be very important for her what she did and her results, what she would achieve. But just like women today, she had to balance it all. She had to balance being a wife, balance being a mother, taking care of their home, taking care of their son, but she had to balance her husband's ego. Because I also think that during that time, there was more ribbing, that was the word that we used, of men with wives who were working outside of the home. And so some of it was Lyle's belief that he should be the breadwinner and taking care. But some of it was, I think he was a bit embarrassed that his wife was getting her name in the newspaper instead of he having his name in the newspaper.
There's mob boss, Lucky Luciano. He's the main antagonist of the book. What are the details that the special prosecutor against Lucky had to get right for this story? Marie, do you want to take it?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, they were trying to build an evidentiary chain that really had never been successful before. Thomas Dewey, who eventually became the governor of New York, he was appointed to be the special prosecutor in charge of bringing down the mob, which really had a grip on the city in so many different areas. And time was of the essence. He had a mandate. He had to get going. And up until this point in time, the only successful prosecutions against the mob had been for tax evasion. And they were trying to get something meatier and heftier. And so he had been trying really any racket they were involved in, from bootlegging to gambling. Thomas Dewey really didn't want to pursue a case against prostitution. He kind of considered it beneath his mandate. That was like a woman's crime. Let's go with something else, which, speaks volumes unto itself. But they needed to find testimony and documentation from people on the other side, people on information from people who were actually engaging in these activities, which was so dangerous for those witnesses because they were basically turning on the mob. And that's really the genesis of this partnership between Polly and Eunice, is understanding the breadth of the evidentiary chain that Eunice would have to create to successfully build this really unprecedented case. They would have had to know kind of bit by bit how this extensive operation was running, how to get information, whether it was testimony or documentation. And to do that, she needed somebody on the inside who could help guide her and point her in the direction of where that information would lie.
We don't want to give away too much, Victoria, but what is lurking in the shadows for both Eunice and Polly?
A whole bunch of danger. As we were writing the story, Marie kept saying to me, the mob is at the door. And that was the way we wrote it. People say they love the pacing of this book because the mob was at the door. The danger was anytime first of all, Eunice was already in danger. We didn't even cover all the threats and everything that the team received from the mob trying to go after them, to get them to pull the case. And they went after Eunice even more because she was the only woman who was on the prosecution team. So that was the first thing. And then every time Polly and Eunice met, that was like putting a target on their backs, especially how they chose to meet. And I don't want to give it away too much because they had to meet to exchange information. They weren't friends. They couldn't sit across from each other in a diner during the New York in 1932 and how segregated New York was. But they wouldn't have wanted to do that anyway. They couldn't be seen together. So they had to come up with very creative ways and stay as much ahead of the mob as they could. They were lurking in the shadows. They never knew where somebody was going to pop up. They never knew who was watching them. Eunice had several encounters. Polly had several encounters. And that was the biggest threat for all of them in this novel.
That was my conversation with authors Marie Benedict and Victoria Christopher Murray, who co-authored the novel called A Pair of Aces.